My son-in-law pointed a finger at my worn-out shoes and laughed in front of the judge, saying, "He's so poor, he can't even afford a bus ticket, let alone a lawyer. Look at him, he's pathetic." I sat there gripping my cane, saying absolutely nothing. The courtroom snickered, my own daughter looked away in shame, and the judge was about to bang his gavel to strip me of my rights. But then the heavy oak doors swung open and a man walked in. A man worth billions. A man who makes Wall Street tremble. And when he walked straight past the high-priced lawyers and shook my hand, the entire room went deadly silent. My son-in-law's smile vanished instantly, because he knew in that terrifying moment that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Before I tell you how I destroyed their greed with a single signature, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that underestimate an old man is a dangerous game. The air in the courtroom was stale, smelling of floor wax and cheap coffee, but the stench of betrayal was far stronger. I sat alone at the defendant's table, feeling the cold wood against my wrists. My name is Bernie Caldwell, and at 72 years old, I was being put on trial for being too old, too poor, and apparently too stupid to manage my own life. Across the aisle stood my son-in-law, Brad Pierce. He looked like $1 million, or at least like someone who desperately wanted you to think he was worth that much. He was wearing a navy blue Armani suit that I knew cost $3,000 because I had seen the credit card bill he tried to hide. His hair was slicked back with enough gel to waterproof a boat, and his gold watch caught the fluorescent lights every time he waved his hand dismissively in my direction. "Your Honor," Brad said, his voice smooth and practiced like a salesman pitching a lemon as a luxury car. "We are not doing this out of malice. We are doing this out of love. Deep concerned love for a man who clearly can no longer take care of himself." He paused for dramatic effect, turning to look at the gallery, then back at the judge. "Look at him. Just look at him. He's wearing a coat from Goodwill that smells like mothballs. He drives a truck that should have been scrapped during the Reagan administration. His bank account has, $500 in it." Brad chuckled, a low, condescending sound that made my blood boil. "He can't even afford a lawyer to defend himself today. Does that look like a man capable of managing a prime piece of real estate? If we don't step in as his guardians, he's going to lose everything to some scam artist. Or worse, he'll just let that valuable land rot just like he's rotting away in that basement." I looked down at my jacket. It was old, yes. The elbows were patched and the collar was frayed. But it was clean. And more importantly, it was paid for with money I earned from honest work, not borrowed from a bank or stolen from a relative. I looked over at my daughter, Melissa. She was sitting behind Brad, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She wore a pearl necklace that used to belong to her mother, my late wife, Catherine. Seeing it around her neck while her husband called me a rotting old man felt like a physical blow to the chest. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Thompson's voice boomed from the bench. He was a tired-looking man who clearly wanted to get to his lunch break. "You have heard the petition. Your son-in-law and daughter are requesting full guardianship over your person and your estate, citing incompetence and financial instability. You have no legal counsel present. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? If you cannot afford an attorney, the court can appoint one, but that will delay these proceedings. Or do you intend to represent yourself against these claims?" Brad leaned against his mahogany table, smirking at me. He whispered loud enough for his lawyer to hear, but I heard it too. "He doesn't even know what guardianship means. He probably thinks we're here to give him a bingo prize." His lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Gavin Ross, who charged $400 an hour, covered a laugh with a cough. "They thought I was deaf. They thought I was feeble. They thought the old machinist whose hands were stained with grease for 40 years was just a piece of furniture they could move around or throw out." I slowly stood up. My knees popped a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. I didn't look at the judge immediately. I looked at Brad. I looked right into his arrogant, greedy eyes. "I understand perfectly, Your Honor. I said, my voice raspy but steady. I don't need a court-appointed lawyer, and I don't need to represent myself. I checked my old Timex watch. It was 10 o'clock exactly. My witness is here. Witness? Brad laughed out loud this time, shaking his head in mock disbelief. Who is he going to call? One of his buddies from the park? Are they going to testify that he can still feed the pigeons without falling over? This is a waste of the court's time, Your Honor. He's stalling because he knows he's lost. But his laughter died in his throat as the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom groaned open. The sound was like a thunderclap. Heads turned. The bailiff straightened his spine. Even the court stenographer stopped typing. Walking through those doors wasn't a park buddy. It wasn't a neighbor. It was a man flanked by 4 assistants in matching gray suits carrying briefcases that looked like they contained nuclear codes. The man himself was tall, silver-haired, and wearing a suit that made Brad's Armani look like a Halloween costume. He walked with the kind of confidence that can't be bought, only earned through decades of wielding absolute power. It was Alexander Harrington, the CEO of Harrington Industries, the man whose face was on the cover of Forbes last month, the man Brad had been trying to get a meeting with for 5 years and failed every single time, and he was walking straight toward me. Silence is a weapon if you know how to use it. While my son-in-law preened like a peacock in his expensive suit, waiting for me to explode or break down in tears, I simply stared at the scarred knuckles of my right hand. These hands had built engines for tanks. They had lathed steel with a precision of 1,000th of an inch. They had held my wife's hand as she took her last breath. They were steady then, and they were steady now. I did not feel the shame Brad wanted me to feel. I felt the cold, hard calculation of a mechanic listening to a machine that is about to break apart. My old Timex ticked against my wrist. 10:01. Precision matters. In my line of work, a fraction of a millimeter is the difference between a working engine and a pile of scrap metal. Life is no different. You just have to wait for the gears to align. That rhythmic ticking sound pulled me away from the sterile courtroom for a brief moment. The fluorescent lights faded, replaced by the warm yellow glow of a hanging shop lamp. I was back in my garage 30 years ago. The smell of oil and sawdust filled my nose. I felt a firm, calloused hand gripping mine. I saw a young man, his face smeared with grease, looking at me with an intensity that burned brighter than a welding torch. I could hear his voice clearly in my mind, cutting through the noise of the past. "Bernie," he had said, looking me dead in the eye, "you gave me a future when no one else would give me the time of day. If you ever need me, I do not care if I am in a board meeting or on the moon. I will be there." That handshake was a bond stronger than any contract these overpaid lawyers could draft. It was a promise made in steel and sweat. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, a sound like grinding gears that snapped me back to the present. He leaned over the bench, his eyes thick with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He saw an old man staring into space, confirming every lie my family had just told. "Mr. Caldwell." The judge boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "We are not here to stare at the clock. This court has a full docket today. Since you have remained silent and have no counsel present, I am inclined to grant the petition for temporary guardianship immediately to ensure your assets are protected." Brad let out a sigh of relief that was loud enough to be heard in the back row. He thought he had won. He was already spending the money in his head. The judge continued looking at me over the rim of his glasses. "Unless, of course, you have a valid reason for this delay. Do you have representation that we are unaware of? Or are you simply confused about the proceedings?" I pushed myself up from the table. My bad knee protested a sharp reminder of a fall from a ladder years ago, but I locked it straight. I stood tall. I did not look at my daughter, whose head was bowed so low her chin touched her chest. I did not look at Brad, who was checking his cuticles. I fixed my gaze on the heavy wooden doors at the very back of the room. no lawyer. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was rough like gravel tumbling in a mixer, but it did not shake. "I do not need a defender, and I am not confused. I just need you to wait exactly 20 seconds. Brad snorted, shaking his head. 20 seconds. For what? For the dementia to kick in. The gallery erupted in scattered laughter again. The judge raised his gavel, ready to end this farce. "No," I answered, keeping my eyes locked on the doors as the second hand on my watch swept past the 12. "My witness is not late. He is just making an entrance." The heavy double doors swung open with a slow, deliberate weight, revealing two men in dark suits who scanned the room with professional indifference. They stepped aside, clearing a path for the man walking behind them. Alexander Harrington did not just enter a room, he occupied it. He was 60 years old, but he moved with the predatory grace of a man half his age. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his charcoal three-piece suit was tailored so sharply it could probably cut glass. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a polished ebony cane in the other, though he clearly did not need it for walking. It was an accessory of command, a scepter for a king in the world of high finance. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. The air seemed to leave the room, sucked out by the sheer gravitational pull of real power. The bailiff, who had been slouching near the wall, snapped to attention so fast his spine audibly cracked. The court stenographer froze her fingers, hovering over the keys, terrified that the sound of her typing would be an insult to the moment. Even Judge Thompson, a man who had presided over this court for 20 years with an iron fist, sat up straighter in his chair, instinctively adjusting his robe. He recognized authority when he saw it, and the authority walking down the center aisle far outstripped the authority of his bench. I watched my son-in-law. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the payoff for months of humiliation. Brad's face went from arrogant amusement to a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His skin turned the color of old paste. His eyes bulged. He knew exactly who Alexander Harrington was. Every investment banker, every venture capitalist, every two-bit hustler with a finance degree knew who Lex was. He was the shark they all wanted to swim with, the titan whose shadow they all lived in. Brad had spent the last 5 years trying to get a 5-minute meeting with one of Harrington's junior assistants. He had framed a rejection letter from Harrington Industries and hung it in his office as motivation. And now the man himself was here. Not on a magazine cover, not on a television screen. Here, in a dingy county courthouse, breathing the same stale air as us. The gold Mont Blanc pen that Brad had been twirling between his fingers, a pen he made sure to tell everyone cost $800, slipped from his sweaty grip. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence. Brad didn't flinch. He didn't look down. He didn't even try to pick it up. He was paralyzed, his mouth hanging slightly open, his brain trying to process an impossible reality. Why was the billionaire CEO of the largest industrial conglomerate in the state walking toward the defense table? Why was he ignoring the expensive lawyers in the front row? Lex walked past the plaintiff's table without even glancing at them. To him, Brad and his high-priced attorney were insignificant, like dust motes floating in a sunbeam. He stopped right in front of my table. The scent of expensive cologne, something smoky and rich, like aged leather and tobacco, washed over me, drowning out the smell of floor wax. Lex looked at me, his steel-gray eyes softening for the first time. He didn't look at me like a pauper. He didn't look at me like a senile old man. He looked at me with the respect a soldier gives a general. He set his briefcase down on the table with a heavy thud, the sound of finalizing a deal. Then he turned slowly to face the judge, and the sheer force of his presence made the courtroom feel small. Brad made a small choking noise in his throat, realizing that the predator had just entered the cage, and for the first time in his life, Brad Pierce was the prey. The bailiff, a young man who looked like he had never dealt with anyone more important than a parking violator, stepped forward with a shaky hand. He pointed toward the witness box, a small wooden enclosure to the left of the judge's bench. "Mr. Harrington," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "If you would please take the stand, the clerk will swear you in." Lex did not even look at him. He didn't acknowledge the instruction, because in his world, he gave the instructions. He walked straight past the witness stand, past the court reporter, who was staring at him with her mouth slightly open, and stopped right at my table. He pulled out the empty chair next to me, the chair that Brad had mocked just minutes ago, as the seat for my imaginary friends. The legs scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made everyone flinch. Lex sat down. He settled into the cheap, government-issued chair as if it were a throne in a boardroom. He placed his briefcase on the table. It wasn't just a bag. It was a statement. It was made of dark, textured crocodile skin, the kind that costs more than the car Brad drove here. The gold latches clicked open with a sound like a pistol being cocked. He didn't open it yet. He just rested his hands on top of it, his fingers long and manicured, wearing a signet ring that bore a crest older than this courthouse. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. For the first time in the hearing, he looked unsure of his own authority. "Mr. Harrington," he said, his tone respectful but firm, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding court procedure. If you are here to testify on behalf of Mr. Caldwell regarding his competency, you must take the witness stand. Counsel cannot sit with the defendant unless they are well, counsel." Brad's lawyer, Gavin Ross, stood up. He smoothed his tie, trying to look important, but I could see a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," Ross objected, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "Mr. Harrington is not a member of the bar. He has no standing to sit at the defense table. We move to have him seated in the gallery or removed." Lex turned his head slowly to look at Ross. It was the look a lion gives a yapping dog before deciding if it's worth the energy to kill it. Then he looked up at the judge. "I am not a witness, Your Honor," Lex said. His voice was calm baritone and filled the room without the need for a microphone. "And I am certainly not a lawyer. I don't bill by the hour. I bill by the outcome." He tapped the crocodile briefcase with his index finger. "I am here to file an emergency motion to intervene." Lex continued. "I am not testifying for Mr. Caldwell. I am standing with him as a co-plaintiff in a countersuit against Mr. Bradford Pierce for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." The words hung in the air like smoke. You could hear a pin drop. Brad's mouth fell open, his face draining of all color until he looked like a wax figure left out in the sun. Gavin Ross knocked over his water pitcher. The ice cubes spilled across his table, soaking his expensive legal pad, but he didn't even move to clean it up. "A countersuit," the judge asked, blinking rapidly. "Mr. Harrington, this is a guardianship hearing." "Not anymore," Lex said, finally popping the latches of his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in blue legal covers. "Because as of this morning, half of the assets Mr. Pierce is trying to seize do not belong to Mr. Caldwell alone. They belong to a joint trust established in 1985. A trust that I manage. So if this boy wants to steal Bernie's money, he's going to have to steal mine first. And I assure you, Your Honor, I am much harder to rob. To understand how I ended up sitting in a courtroom with a billionaire beside me and my own family trying to bury me, we have to go back to when the only thing I had to worry about was whether the base were biting. 3 months ago, my life was simple. It was quiet. And looking back now, it was the calm before the storm that would tear my world apart. I lived in a small cabin on the edge of Silver Lake. It wasn't a mansion. It was a modest 2-bedroom home with cedar siding that I had stained myself every other summer for the past 20 years. My wife Catherine and I had bought it back in 1989 when the area was just trees and water, long before the developers and the tech millionaires moved in. We had planted an oak tree in the backyard on the day we moved in, and now its branches stretched over the roof like a protective arm. That tree and I were the only two old things left on this side of the lake. That morning started like any other Tuesday. The sun was just beginning to burn the mist off the water, painting the sky in shades of pale orange and violet. I was in my kitchen making coffee. Not the fancy espresso stuff my son-in-law drinks, but real coffee, black and strong enough to wake up the dead. I cracked 2 eggs into a cast-iron skillet, listening to the satisfying sizzle as they hit the hot grease. The smell of bacon and old wood smoke filled the air. It was a smell of home, a smell of peace. I took my breakfast out to the back porch and sat in my rocking chair. The wood creaked under my weight, a familiar groan that sounded like an old friend saying hello. I watched a heron stalking fish in the shallows. My knee was aching a bit, a dull throb that usually meant rain was coming, but I didn't mind. At 72, aches and pains are just proof that you're still alive. I had my pension, I had my books, and I had the memories of Catherine in every corner of the house. I was content. I was free, or so I thought. Then the phone rang. It wasn't a cell phone. I kept an old rotary phone on the wall in the kitchen because I liked the weight of the receiver and the mechanical sound of the bell. It rarely rang these days. Most of my friends were either deaf or dead, and the telemarketers usually gave up after I told them I didn't own a computer. But this ringing was persistent, harsh. It cut through the morning silence like a siren. I put down my coffee cup and walked back inside. I remember looking at the phone for a second, feeling a strange knot tighten in my stomach. Call it instinct. Call it a premonition. But I knew, even before I picked it up, that the peace I had cherished for so long was about to end. I lifted the receiver. "Hello, Dad?" It was Melissa. Her voice was high-pitched, breathless, the way it always got when she wanted something, or when she was hiding something. "Dad, are you okay? We've been so worried. Brad had a dream that you fell, and we just had to call." I frowned, looking down at my steady hands. "I'm fine, Melissa. I'm eating breakfast. Why would you be worried? I haven't heard from you since Christmas." "Oh, don't be like that," she said, and I could hear the fake pout in her voice. "We're coming to visit. Today. Brad wants to see the lake. We'll be there in an hour." Before I could say no, before I could tell them I wanted to be alone, the line went dead. I hung up the phone slowly. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the oak tree. The heron had flown away. The water was no longer smooth. It was choppy and gray. The storm wasn't just coming. It was already here, driving a Porsche Cayenne. It took 3 hours for them to arrive, but it only took 3 seconds for my life to go completely sideways. After that confusing phone call with Melissa, I tried to keep myself busy. I figured if they were coming to disrupt my peace, I should at least get some work done before the circus arrived. I went out to the garage to finish sanding an old rocking chair I was restoring. My garage was my sanctuary, organized with the kind of military precision that would make a drill sergeant weep with joy. Every tool had its place. Every can of varnish was labeled, and the floor was always swept clean. I was carrying a can of stain from the shelf to my workbench. I had walked that path 1,000 times. I knew every crack in the concrete, every uneven spot. But as I took a step near the back door, my foot hit something slick. It wasn't water. It was thicker like oil, but clear. Before my brain could even register the danger, my legs went out from under me. I fell hard. My hip slammed into the concrete with a sickening crunch that vibrated all the way up to my jaw. The can of stain flew from my hand, splashing dark liquid across the floor like blood at a crime scene. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot through my leg. I gasped, trying to draw breath, but the wind had been knocked out of me. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the rafters, waiting for the spinning to stop. Why was the floor slippery? I never spilled anything. I was meticulous. I tried to push myself up, but my right leg screamed in protest, a jagged agony that made me cry out. I collapsed back onto the cold cement, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. That was when I heard the car door slam outside. The timing was impeccable, almost too impeccable. Dad, Melissa's voice called out from the driveway. "Dad, are you in there?" "Help," I croaked. It was barely a whisper. I tried again, louder this time, fighting through the nausea rising in my throat. "In here, help me." The garage door opened, letting in a flood of harsh sunlight. Brad and Melissa stood silhouetted in the doorway. They didn't run to me immediately. For a split second, and I swear on my wife's grave this happened, they just stood there. They looked at me lying in a puddle of wood stain, broken and helpless, and they didn't look horrified. They looked relieved, like a problem had just solved itself. Then the mask slipped back on. "Oh my God! Dad!" Melissa shrieked, rushing over but stopping short of the mess on the floor, careful not to ruin her suede boots. "Brad, call 911. He fell. "I told you something like this would happen." Brad walked over slowly, stepping carefully around the slick spot. He crouched down, his face close to mine. He smelled of expensive mints and new car leather. "Well, Bernie," he said, his voice devoid of any real warmth, "looks like living alone finally caught up with you, didn't it? This place is a death trap." I looked at the floor near his shoe. There was a faint sheen there, a trail that looked like it had been sprayed. WD-40 silicone lubricant. I reached out to touch it to check, but Brad grabbed my hand. "Don't move, Dad," he said firmly, squeezing my fingers a little too hard. "You're in shock. Let the professionals handle this. You've clearly made enough of a mess for one day." The smell of a hospital is distinct. It is a mixture of rubbing alcohol floor wax and the metallic tang of fear. I woke up with my leg encased in plaster, elevated on a sling that looked more like a medieval torture device than medical equipment. A dull, rhythmic throbbing hammered against my hip bone, a constant reminder of the concrete floor I had kissed just hours ago. But the physical pain was manageable. I had broken bones before. I had taken shrapnel in Da Nang. Pain is just a signal. What I couldn't stomach was the performance taking place at the foot of my bed. Brad was standing there talking to the attending physician with the kind of authoritative volume usually reserved for boardrooms. He wasn't asking about my recovery time or my pain levels. He was asking about liability and long-term care facilities. He wore a mask of deep, furrowed concern that looked practiced, like an actor rehearsing for a daytime soap opera. "Doctor, you have to understand," Brad said, placing a hand on the physician's shoulder as if they were old frat brothers. "He is 72. He lives alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. This isn't just a fall. This is a wake-up call. We can't in good conscience let him go back there. It is negligent." The doctor, a young man with tired eyes, nodded sympathetically, glancing at his clipboard. "I understand your concern, Mr. Pierce, but medically it is a clean break, with some physical therapy and home assistance." Brad cut him off, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that he thought I couldn't hear. "Home assistance, who is going to pay for that? And what happens when he falls again next week? No, we need to discuss discharge options that involve 24-hour supervision." Then there was Melissa, my little girl. She was sitting in the visitor's chair, weeping into a tissue that was already shredded to pieces. But she wasn't holding my hand. She wasn't stroking my forehead like she used to when I had the flu back when she was 10. She was sitting 3 feet away, crying about herself. "Oh, Daddy," she sobbed, looking up at the ceiling. I told you this would happen. Every time the phone rings, I have a panic attack thinking you are dead on that kitchen floor. It is too much. It is just too much for me to handle right now with Brad's stress at work and the new house renovations." She looked at me, then her eyes red and puffy, but there was an edge to her gaze, a hardness. "Why are you being so stubborn? Why do you have to live all the way out there? It is selfish, Daddy. It is selfish to make us worry like this. I tried to sit up, but the room spun. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. I am not dead, Melissa, I rasped. It was a slip. There was oil on the floor. Brad spun around his face, flushing with artificial anger. Oil. There you go again. Blaming the floor. Blaming the house, Bernie. You are in denial. You are losing your balance. You are losing your grip. Today it was a hip. Tomorrow it could be your neck. Do you want Melissa to find your body after 3 days? Is that the legacy you want to leave her? He moved to the side of the bed, looming over me, blocking out the harsh fluorescent light. His voice softened, becoming sickly sweet. Look, we are family. We step up. We are not going to abandon you. But you have to work with us. You have to let us take the wheel now. You have crashed the car, Bernie. It is time to hand over the keys. The morphine drip had dulled the sharp edges of the pain in my hip, but it also clouded my judgment. I was lying there feeling smaller and older than I ever had in my life when Brad pulled a chair right up to the bedside rail. He leaned in close, his cologne overpowering the scent of antiseptic. He didn't look like the man who had just insulted my home. He looked like a son, or at least he looked like the son I had always wished I had. Bernie, he started, his voice dropping to a confidential, warm register. I know we have had our differences. I know I come on strong sometimes, but seeing you on that garage floor, it changed everything for me. It made me realize that time is short. Too short. He pulled out his phone and swiped to a photo. It was a picture of a house. Not a house, a mansion. It had white pillars, a sprawling lawn, and windows that reflected the blue sky. We just closed on this place in the Hamptons, Brad said, his eyes gleaming with pride. It is 4,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms, a heated pool. And the best part, we picked it out with you in mind. I blinked, trying to focus on the small screen. Me, I asked. Yes, Daddy. Melissa chimed in, taking my hand. Her palm was soft, uncalloused, so different from mine. We want you to come live with us. No more lonely nights at the lake. No more worrying about who will find you if you fall. We have a ground floor suite picked out just for you. It has a view of the garden. You can sit there and read your books, and we will bring you coffee every morning. Brad nodded enthusiastically. Think about it, Bernie. You sell that old cabin. The market is hot right now. You could get $450,000 easy. You put that money into the new house and it is like an investment in your own care. We take care of the cooking, the cleaning, the driving. You just retire. For real this time. You become the patriarch of the estate. The word patriarch hung in the air. It sounded dignified. It sounded safe. For the last 10 years since Catherine died, my life had been a series of silent meals and empty rooms. I talked to the radio more than I talked to real people. The idea of waking up in a house full of life, of having my daughter nearby, of being safe. It was a siren song. It was intoxicating. I looked at Melissa. She was smiling a hopeful, desperate smile. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that under the designer clothes and the superficiality, my little girl was still in there. I wanted to believe that Brad wasn't a shark, but a man trying to build a family legacy. Loneliness is a terrible thing. It eats away at your defenses like rust on a fender. It makes you ignore the warning signs. It makes you ignore the fact that Brad kept mentioning the sale price of my cabin. It makes you ignore the fact that they hadn't visited me in 2 years until they needed something. I looked at the photo of the big white house again. It looked like a fortress against the world. A ground floor suite, I asked, my voice weak. The best room in the house, Brad promised, squeezing my shoulder. King-sized bed, private bath. You will live like a king, Bernie. You deserve it. I closed my eyes. I was tired of fighting. I was tired of being alone. Okay, I whispered. Let's do it. Brad and Melissa exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of love. It was the look of two people who had just closed a business deal. But in my drug-hazed state, I told myself it was relief. I signed the invisible contract with my heart, not knowing I was signing away my freedom. Signing the deed to the cabin felt less like a real estate transaction and more like signing a confession. The pen felt heavy in my hand, a dead weight of plastic and ink that was about to erase 30 years of history. The notary, a woman with kind eyes who looked like she would rather be anywhere else, pointed to the line marked seller. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the paper. This wasn't just wood and siding. This was the place where I taught Melissa to ride a bike. This was the place where Catherine and I sat on the porch and watched the rain until we were old and gray. Brad was standing behind me, practically vibrating with impatience. He checked his gold watch for the third time in a minute. Come on, Bernie, he urged, his voice tight. The buyers are wiring the funds within the hour. We don't want to spook them. The market is volatile. You hesitate now, and we lose 50 grand. I didn't care about the 50 grand. I cared about the ghost of my wife that I was leaving behind in the hallway. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed. Bernard Caldwell. The signature looked shaky, like a seismograph reading of an earthquake. After the notary left, the packing began. Or rather, the purging. Brad had hired a moving crew, but I insisted on packing the bedroom myself. I stood in front of the mantel, staring at the silver-framed photograph of Catherine. It was taken on our 25th anniversary. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes crinkled with pure joy. I reached out and took it down. The wall behind it was a shade darker than the rest of the room, a rectangle of the past that had been protected from the sun. Seeing that clean spot broke something inside me that the fall in the garage hadn't. I wrapped the photo in bubble wrap, treating it as gently as I would a newborn baby. I felt like I was suffocating her. I felt like I was putting her in a box and sealing the lid. Great news, Dad. Brad burst into the room holding his phone up like a trophy. The wire just hit. $450,000. Clean. He didn't give me a moment to mourn. He sat down on the bed, my bed stripped of its sheets, and opened a banking app on his tablet. Now here is the plan, he said, tapping the screen rapidly. We are going to move this directly into the Pierce Family Growth Fund. It is a diversified portfolio I manage. High yield, low risk. If we leave it in a standard savings account, inflation will eat it alive. You want to leave something substantial for Melissa, don't you? He looked at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw the hunger in his eyes. It wasn't concern for my legacy. It was greed. But I was tired. My hip throbbed. My house was gone. I was a man without a castle, and I needed a place to land. I trust you, Brad. I said the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Do what you think is best. He grinned. It was a wide, toothy smile that didn't reach his eyes. You are making the right choice, Bernie. I am going to turn this money into a fortune. You won't have to worry about a single bill for the rest of your life. He tapped a final button. Transfer complete. $450,000 money earned from 40 years of grease under my fingernails, and missed holidays vanished from my account and appeared in his. I looked around the empty room. I had sold my past to buy a future, but as I walked out the front door for the last time, I had a sinking feeling that I had just been robbed. The drive to the new house was quiet. I sat in the back seat of the Porsche, watching the familiar trees of the lake disappear, replaced by high manicured hedges and iron gates. When we finally pulled up to the house Brad had shown me in the picture, it looked even bigger in person. It was a white colonial mansion with pillars thick enough to stop a tank. It screamed money. My money, mostly. But as I stepped out of the car, leaning heavily on my cane, I didn't feel like the patriarch arriving at his castle. I felt like a guest who had overstayed his welcome before he even walked through the door. "Welcome home, Bernie," Brad said, spreading his arms wide. He didn't offer to carry my bag. That job was left to me. I grabbed my small duffel, the only thing I had kept out of storage, and followed them up the steps. I expected to be led to the ground floor suite they had promised, the one with the king-sized bed and the view of the rose garden. I was already picturing myself sitting by the window reading my Western novels in the sun. But when we entered the foyer under a chandelier that probably cost more than my first truck, Brad didn't turn left toward the east wing. He walked straight through the kitchen and stopped at a narrow, unmarked door next to the pantry. "Where are we going?" I asked, pausing by the marble island. "I thought the suite was on the main hall." Brad didn't look at me. He was busy typing something on his phone. "Change of plans, Bern. The contractors found black mold in the east wing this morning. Total disaster. We had to gut the whole section. It is going to be a construction zone for months. Dust, noise, fumes. You don't want to be breathing that stuff in with your lungs." Melissa nodded eagerly, too eagerly. "It is for your health, Daddy. We set up a temporary space for you downstairs, just until the renovations are done. It is actually very private." Brad opened the narrow door. A smell hit me instantly. It wasn't the smell of roses. It was the smell of damp concrete and stagnant air, the smell of a place where things are stored and forgotten. "Downstairs?" I asked, staring into the gloom. "You mean the basement?" "It is a finished lower level," Brad corrected sharply, flipping a switch. A single bulb flickered to life at the bottom of the stairs. "Come on, take a look. It is cozy." I navigated the stairs, carefully gripping the railing which felt loose in the wall. When I reached the bottom, my heart sank into my shoes. It wasn't a finished lower level. It was a concrete box. The walls were bare cinder block, painted a hasty, peeling white. There was no king-sized bed. There was a twin cot pushed against the wall, the kind used in army barracks. There was no private bath, just a toilet behind a folding screen. And the garden view. It was a single horizontal window near the ceiling, barely large enough to let in a sliver of gray light, staring directly at the underside of the deck. I stood there, gripping my bag, feeling the dampness seep into my bad hip. "This is it?" I asked, my voice echoing off the cold walls. "This is the luxury suite." "It is temporary, Bernie," Brad said, checking his watch again, already halfway back up the stairs. "Don't be dramatic. It is quiet down here. You can hear yourself think. Now get settled. We have a dinner reservation at 7 and we are running late. There is a sandwich in the mini-fridge if you get hungry." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked up the stairs and closed the door. I heard the lock click, just a soft sound, but in that silence it sounded like a prison cell slamming shut. I sat down on the cot, the springs groaning under me, and looked up at the tiny window. I had sold my home for this. I had traded my freedom for a hole in the ground. And for the first time I realized that the renovation story was a lie. They never intended to put me in the suite. I was exactly where they wanted me, out of sight, out of mind, and completely under their control. The first night in my new home set the tone for the rest of my sentence. I had unpacked my meager belongings, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, and the few books Brad hadn't thrown out, and sat on the cot listening to the muffled sounds of footsteps above me. It was 7 o'clock. My stomach growled, reminding me that the sandwich Brad mentioned was just a slice of processed cheese on stale white bread. I decided to go upstairs. Not to cause trouble, but simply to get a glass of water and maybe say hello to whatever guests were important enough to delay my welcome dinner. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hips stiff from the damp cold of the basement. When I opened the door to the kitchen, the warmth and the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary hit me like a physical wall. The kitchen was buzzing. Caterers in black uniforms were arranging elaborate appetizers on silver trays. And there, standing by the island with a glass of red wine, was Brad. He was laughing at something a tall, thin man in a gray suit was saying. Melissa was next to him wearing a dress that probably cost more than my entire truck. I stepped into the room. "Hello?" I said, my voice sounding rough and out of place in the polished atmosphere. The laughter stopped abruptly. Brad spun around, his smile vanishing instantly. He didn't look happy to see me. He looked horrified. He walked over to me quickly, placing a hand on my chest to stop me from moving further into the room. "Bernie," he hissed, his voice low and tight. "What are you doing up here? I told you we have company." "I just wanted some water," I said, looking past him at the guests, who were now staring at me with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "And I thought, well, I live here now. I thought I might join you for dinner." Brad let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Join us, Bernie, look at you." He gestured to my flannel shirt and worn work pants. "These are potential investors, important people. You can't just wander in here looking like the gardener. It sends the wrong message." He steered me back toward the basement door, his grip firm. "Look, we'll bring you down a plate later, after everyone leaves. But for now you need to stay downstairs. We can't have you roaming around. It's distracting." "Distracting?" I asked, feeling a flush of humiliation rise in my cheeks. "I'm your father-in-law, not a stray dog." "Bernie, please," Melissa called out from the island, not even bothering to come over. "Just do this for us. It's a big night for Brad. Don't ruin it." Brad opened the basement door and practically shoved me through it. "There's bottled water in the mini-fridge," he said. "Stay put. We'll talk tomorrow." He closed the door. I stood on the top step, listening to the lock click again. From the other side, I heard the laughter resume, louder this time. I heard glasses clinking. I heard Brad's voice, smooth and charming, telling a joke. They were eating the food, bought with my money, celebrating in the house bought with my money, while I stood in the dark, clutching the railing, realizing that I wasn't a guest, and I certainly wasn't family. I was a ghost they were trying to hide in the cellar. The dampness of the basement was not just uncomfortable, it was a physical assault. After 2 weeks of sleeping on a cot that offered as much support as a hammock made of fishing net, my sciatica had flared up with a vengeance. It felt like a hot wire was being pulled tight from my lower back all the way down to my ankle. Every step was a negotiation with pain. I knew I needed my prescription refill. It was a simple anti-inflammatory costing exactly $50 with my insurance copay. $50. The amount I used to spend on a casual Tuesday lunch for my crew at the shop. Now it was a fortune I did not have. I dragged myself up the stairs, gripping the handrail, until my knuckles turned white. I could hear the chime of the front doorbell, followed by Melissa's excited squeal. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, reminiscent of Christmas mornings when she was a child. I opened the door to the foyer just in time to see her signing for a package. It was a large box wrapped in the signature packaging of a high-end French fashion house. Melissa was sitting on the floor, tearing into the box with a box cutter, her eyes wide and manic. She pulled out a handbag. It was made of ostrich leather dyed a deep, vibrant emerald green. She held it up to the light, turning it side to side, practically purring at it. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" she asked, not really looking at me, just sensing my presence. "Brad said I needed to upgrade my wardrobe for the gala next week." "It is very nice, Melissa," I said, leaning against the doorframe to take the weight off my bad leg. "Listen, honey, I need a favor. My back is locking up. I need to go to the pharmacy to get my refill. I just need $50 for the copay." Melissa's smile vanished instantly. She lowered the bag, resting it on her lap protectively, as if my poverty might stain the leather. "Oh, Dad." Again. "We just bought you groceries on Monday. It is medicine, Melissa, not candy. I am in pain." She sighed, a long, exaggerated exhalation that signaled I was being a burden. "Dad, honestly, I don't have any cash. Brad handles all the accounts, now you know that. We are a little illiquid at the moment, because he moved everything into the new tech startup fund. I can't just pull money out of thin air. I looked at the green bag in her lap. Then I looked at her. The daughter who used to save her allowance to buy me socks for my birthday was gone, replaced by this woman who spoke in buzzwords she didn't understand. "That bag," I said quietly, pointing a trembling finger. "How much was it?" She flinched, pulling the bag closer to her chest. "That is irrelevant. It is an investment. It is for appearances. You don't understand how this world works, Dad. You have to look successful to be successful." "How much, Melissa?" 12,000. She snapped, her voice rising defensively. "It was $12,000. And don't look at me like that. We deserve nice things. We work hard." "You don't work, Melissa," I said, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. "And Brad doesn't work. You are spending my retirement money. You are wearing my house on your arm while I can't afford to walk without pain." Her face hardened. She stood up, clutching the $12,000 bag like a shield. "Stop it. Stop guilt-tripping me. This is exactly why Brad says you are toxic. You are jealous of our success. If your back hurts so much, maybe you should lie down and rest instead of standing here counting our pennies." She turned her back on me and walked into the living room, effectively ending the conversation. I stood there for a long time, the pain in my leg throbbing in rhythm with my heartbeat. But the pain in my chest was worse. I realized then that I hadn't just lost my money. I had lost my daughter. She hadn't just been brainwashed. She had been bought. And apparently, the price of her conscience was exactly one green ostrich leather handbag. I turned around and slowly, painfully descended back into the dark. I didn't ask for medicine again. The ceiling of my basement prison was not soundproof, and on that Saturday night, every footstep from the floor above felt like a stomp on my chest. It was the night of Brad's big fundraising gala for his venture capital firm. He called it a strategic networking event. I called it a crime scene. From my cot, I could hear the smooth jazz playlist he had curated loud enough to drown out the hum of the dehumidifier, but not loud enough to mask the clinking of crystal glasses and the roar of expensive laughter. The smell was the worst part. It drifted down through the air vents, a cruel reminder of the life I was funding, but was forbidden to touch. It was the scent of roasted lamb with rosemary, the earthy aroma of truffle oil, and the sweet, buttery smell of puff pastry. I knew that smell. Brad had hired Chef Marco, the most expensive caterer in the city. I knew this because I had seen the invoice on the kitchen counter before Brad snatched it away. $15,000 for one night of food. $15,000 of the money I had sweated for, burned in a few hours to impress people who probably didn't even like him. I looked down at my own dinner. It sat on a paper plate on top of an overturned milk crate I was using as a table. 2 slices of white bread that were starting to harden at the crusts, and a single sad slice of bologna that looked as gray as the cinder block walls. I didn't have mustard. I didn't have a drink other than the tap water from the bathroom sink. I took a bite, the dry bread sticking to the roof of my mouth, and tried to swallow the anger along with it. Above me, the voice of my son-in-law boomed, amplified by a microphone. I could picture him perfectly. Standing on the grand staircase, holding a glass of vintage champagne, wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brad announced, his voice oozing charm. "Thank you for being here tonight to celebrate the launch of the Pierce Horizon Fund. We are not just building wealth. We are building a legacy. And I have to give a special shout-out to our primary angel investor, who prefers to remain anonymous, but whose generosity made all of this possible." Applause erupted. Thunderous applause for the anonymous angel. That was me. I was the angel. But I wasn't in the room receiving a handshake. I was the angel locked in the cellar eating processed meat while they drank wine that cost $500 a bottle. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just stealing my money. He was using it to build a pedestal for himself, standing on my back to reach the stars. I stood up and walked to the tiny window. All I could see were the tires of the luxury cars parked in the driveway. Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas. A parade of wealth. I thought about walking up those stairs. I thought about bursting through the kitchen door covered in basement dust and screaming the truth to every person holding a shrimp cocktail. I wanted to tell them that their host was a fraud. I wanted to tell them that the seed money for this fund came from a 72-year-old machinist who couldn't afford his back medication. But I didn't. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I knew the lock was engaged from the other side. Brad had made sure of it. For my own safety, he had said. To keep me from wandering. I was not a guest at this party. I was the dirty secret that had to be kept hidden so the illusion could survive. I sat back down on my cot, the taste of bologna bitter in my mouth, and listened to them toast to a future that they had stolen from me. Thirst is a primal instinct. It overrides pride. It overrides fear. And after 3 hours of lying in the basement, listening to the celebration of my stolen money, the metallic taste of the tap water from the bathroom sink became unbearable. I needed cold, clean water. I told myself I would be a ghost. I would slip up the back stairs, grab a glass from the drying rack, fill it, and disappear before anyone saw the old man in the flannel shirt. I timed my movement with a burst of applause from the living room. I crept up the stairs, my bad leg dragging slightly. The kitchen was momentarily empty, the catering staff busy circulating trays of lobster tails in the main hall. I reached for a glass sitting on the counter. It wasn't one of the crystal flutes. It was a simple, heavy glass tumbler probably costing no more than $2 at a discount store. But as my fingers closed around it, a sudden spasm of pain shot through my lower back, causing my hand to jerk. The glass slipped. It hit the granite countertop with a sharp crack, then bounced onto the tile floor, shattering into 100 jagged pieces. The sound wasn't loud, but in the brief lull of conversation, it sounded like a gunshot. I froze. I bent down trying to scoop up the shards with my bare hands, ignoring the sliver of glass that sliced into my thumb. "What do you think you are doing?" The voice didn't come from behind me. It came from the doorway, loud enough to carry into the living room. Brad was standing there, his face flushed with wine and rage. Behind him, a group of investors fell silent, their eyes widening as they looked from the handsome CEO to the old man on his knees. "I just wanted water," I stammered, blood dripping from my thumb onto the white tile. It slipped. "I will clean it up. Leave it!" Brad roared, storming into the room. He kicked a piece of glass away, sending it skittering under the fridge. "Look at this mess. I turned my back for 5 minutes to secure funding for our future, and you are in here destroying the house." "Brad, please," I whispered, standing up slowly. It was a $2 glass. "It is not about the glass, Bernie," he yelled, turning to face his guests, using me as a prop in his performance of the burdened saint. "It is about competence. It is about the constant drain on my energy and my resources. Do you have any idea how hard it is to run a multi-million-dollar firm when I have to babysit a senile old man who can't even hold a cup of water?" He pointed at me, his fingers shaking with theatrical anger. "I pay for his food, I pay for his housing, I pay for his medical bills, and this is the thanks I get: clumsiness, destruction. He is a liability, a total write-off." The room was dead silent. I saw Melissa in the background clutching her new green bag, looking at the floor. No one stepped forward. No one offered a bandage for my bleeding hand. They just watched, sipping their expensive wine, judging the liability standing in the kitchen. "You are useless, Bernie." Brad spat out the words low enough so only I could hear the full venom, but loud enough for the front row to catch the sentiment. "Go back downstairs, before you break something that actually has value." I looked at him. I looked at the blood on my hand. I looked at the investors who were nodding sympathetically at Brad, buying into his narrative of the martyr son-in-law. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked back to the basement door. I didn't get my water. But as I descended into the dark, I realized that Brad had just given me something much more valuable than hydration. He had given me a witness list, and he had shown me exactly how much he valued my dignity less than the price of a shattered $2 glass. The shame of the broken glass burned in my chest for hours, but it was curiosity that pulled me out of the basement later that night. The party had wound down. The heavy thud of the bass had been replaced by the soft clatter of the catering crew packing up. I waited until the house was silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. I needed to know if Brad had thrown away the glass shards or kept them as evidence of my incompetence for the guardianship hearing. It sounds paranoid, but living with Brad taught me that paranoia was just another word for awareness. I crept up the stairs, my socks muffling my footsteps on the hardwood. The kitchen was dark, but a sliver of light spilled from under the door of Brad's home office down the hall. I heard his voice. He wasn't talking to Melissa. The tone was different, playful, arrogant, the way a man talks when he is trying to impress a woman he hasn't married yet. "Baby, I told you the deal is practically done," Brad said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet hallway. "The old man is softer than I thought." He signed over the house proceeds without even reading the fine print. 450 grand straight into the Cayman account. It's untouchable. I froze. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. Cayman account. He had told me it was a domestic growth fund. "No, Melissa doesn't know," Brad continued, laughing softly. "She thinks we're investing in the future. And we are. My future. Listen, once the court declares him incompetent next week, I'll have power of attorney over everything. The pension, the Social Security, and that land he's sitting on. I'm going to dump him in that state facility off the highway, Shady Pines or whatever it's called. It's cheap, it's grim, and nobody visits. He'll be out of our hair in a month." My knees nearly gave out. I had to grab the doorframe to steady myself. Shady Pines wasn't a retirement community. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where the elderly were sedated into silence until they died. He wasn't just planning to steal my money. He was planning to bury me alive. "Don't worry about the wife," Brad said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She's easier to manipulate than her father. A few designer bags, a few compliments, and she'll sign whatever I put in front of her. She's pathetic, honestly. But she's useful. For now." I covered my mouth to stifle a gasp. It wasn't just me. He despised Melissa, too. She was just another pawn in his game, a useful idiot to help him secure the bag. I felt a surge of nausea so strong I thought I would be sick right there in the hallway. This wasn't just greed. This was predation. Pure, unadulterated evil wrapped in an Armani suit. I had spent months blaming Melissa, feeling betrayed by her, but now I realized she was just another victim, albeit a willing one. "I have to go," Brad said. "The caterers missed a spot on the carpet. I need to yell at someone before I go to bed. I'll see you tomorrow at the hotel. Wear that red thing I bought you." I heard the sound of a chair scraping back. I didn't wait. I turned and moved as fast as my bad leg would allow, scrambling back toward the basement door. I made it inside and clicked the lock just as I heard the office door open. I sat in the dark on my cot, shivering uncontrollably. But it wasn't from the cold anymore. It was from the rage. The kind of cold, hard rage that clears the mind and steadies the hand. He thought I was soft. He thought I was done. He had no idea he had just given me the weapon I needed to destroy him. The next morning, silence returned to the mansion, but it felt heavy like the air before a tornado. Brad had left for his office, probably to brag about his successful gala, and Melissa was at a spa recovering from the exhaustion of hosting a party she didn't cook for. The house was mine for the first time in weeks. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but the conversation I had overheard about the Cayman account and the nursing home had stripped away my fear. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a spy behind enemy lines. I walked straight to Brad's home office. The door was unlocked. Inside, the room smelled of stale cigar smoke and arrogance. My eyes went immediately to the mahogany desk. It was cluttered with papers, but one stack was separated from the rest, held together by a large metal clip. The cover sheet read, Project Lakeside. I flipped it open. It was a draft purchase agreement for the remaining 3 acres of land surrounding my old cabin. The land I had kept. The land where Catherine and I had planted the oak tree on our 25th anniversary. Brad had told me the deed was lost, that it was just a matter of filing paperwork. He lied. The deed was right there, sitting under a letter of intent. My hands shook as I read Brad's scribbled notes in the margins. They were written in red ink, aggressive and dismissive. Swampland he had written next to the survey map. No commercial value. Dump it for $50,000 if necessary. Just get the liquidity. $50,000. He was willing to sell the last piece of my history, the soil that held my wife's ashes, for the price of a mid-range sedan. But as I turned the page, my rage turned into something colder, something darker. I saw the name of the prospective buyer, H.I. Holdings. Brad was an idiot. He thought H.I. Holdings was just some faceless shell company buying up cheap rural land. He didn't know that the H stood for Harrington. He didn't know that the I stood for Industries. He was trying to sell my land to Alexander Harrington. I looked at the map again. There was a red X drawn over the spot near the water, right where the great oak tree stood. Next to the X, Brad had written 2 words that made my blood freeze: bulldoze. Remove obstruction. He wanted to bulldoze Catherine. He wanted to sell her memory for pocket change to the one man in the world who would never allow it. I carefully placed the papers back exactly as I found them. A smile touched my lips for the first time in months. Brad thought he was playing chess, but he didn't even know who sat on the other side of the board. He was trying to sell a piece of my heart to my oldest friend, and he had just handed me the shovel I would use to dig his grave. The discovery in the office sat in my chest like a physical weight heavier than lead. Brad was not just a thief. He was an executioner waiting to bulldoze my life. I stumbled out of the office, my vision blurring at the edges. My heart, which had endured 72 years of hard labor and loss, began to flutter wildly. It felt like a bird trapped in a cage beating its wings against my ribs. I made it to the top of the stairs before my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the landing, clutching my chest, gasping for air that felt too thin to breathe. The pain was sharp, radiating down my left arm. Dad. It was Melissa. She was coming out of her bedroom wrapped in a silk robe. She dropped her phone and ran to me, her face pale. Brad. Help, Dad is having a heart attack. Brad appeared from the kitchen below, taking the stairs 2 at a time. For a second, I thought he looked genuinely scared. But as he knelt beside me, checking my pulse, I saw the calculation in his eyes. He wasn't checking to see if I was alive. He was checking how much time he had left. Call 911. Melissa screamed, reaching for her phone. Wait, Brad said, grabbing her wrist. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. Let's not panic. It might just be indigestion. We don't want to cause a scene with the ambulances if it is nothing. Indigestion. I wheezed, my vision tunneling. I can't breathe. Brad ignored me. He looked at Melissa. Go get the file from my desk. The blue one. The one labeled medical directives. We need to make sure we have the authority to treat him before the paramedics arrive. Melissa hesitated, looking from me to him. Brad. He is dying. Call the ambulance, do it. Melissa, Brad roared. Do you want them to put him in a state hospital? Do you want to lose the house? Get the damn file. She ran. She actually ran to get the file. I lay there on the cold floor, staring up at the chandelier. Brad leaned close to my ear. His breath smelled of coffee and mints. Listen to me, Bernie, he whispered. You are going to be fine. But you need to sign something for me. Just a little permission slip so I can get you the best doctors. Okay. He wasn't calling an ambulance. He was pulling a pen from his pocket. Melissa returned with the file, her hands shaking. Brad flipped it open to a page I had never seen. It wasn't a medical directive. It was a durable power of attorney effective immediately upon incapacitation. Sign this, Bernie, Brad said, pressing the pen into my numb fingers. Do it for Melissa. Do it so we can save you. I looked at him. I saw the devil in an Armani suit. I saw the man who wanted to bulldoze my wife's tree. My hand shook violently. I couldn't speak. The darkness was closing in. But in that darkness, a spark of defiance ignited. He wanted a signature, I would give him one. But not the one he expected. I gripped the pen, my mind racing through the fog of pain, plotting my first move in a war he didn't even know had started. I closed my eyes and let my body go limp against the cold, hardwood floor. It was an old trick I learned in the humid jungles of Southeast Asia over 50 years ago. When you are outnumbered and outgunned, sometimes the only way to survive is to play dead. You slow your breathing until it is barely a whisper. You relax every muscle until you are just a sack of meat. And you listen. You listen to the enemy reveal their position. Brad was the enemy, and right now he was shouting orders, but he wasn't shouting for a doctor. He was shouting at Melissa. Hold the paper steady, he hissed. He is fading in and out. If he passes out before we get ink on this page, we are finished. The courts will freeze everything. Do you want to be homeless, Melissa? Do you want to lose the club membership? Hold the damn clipboard. I felt the stiff cardboard press against my chest. I felt Brad's hand, clammy and shaking with adrenaline, grab my right hand. He tried to jam the pen between my fingers. Bernie, he said, his voice dropping to that fake soothing tone that made my skin crawl. Bernie, can you hear me? We need you to sign this form so the doctors can treat you. It is for the surgery, Bernie. Sign it so we can save you. It was a lie so transparent it was almost insulting. But I didn't open my eyes. I let out a low, pained groan, the sound of a man on death's door. Internally, however, my mind was racing with the precision of a CNC machine. If I refused to sign, he might just let me die right here on the rug. If I signed with my normal hand, he would have the legal weapon to destroy me. I needed a third option. I let my right hand fall limp, the pen tumbling from my grasp. Damn it, Brad cursed. He is losing consciousness. Give me the pen. He tried to jam it back into my right hand, but I kept my fingers locked in a spasm, a rigid claw that refused to hold anything. I made my breathing shallow, ragged. Then slowly, painfully, I moved my left hand, my non-dominant hand, the hand that had never signed a check or a contract in 72 years. He is trying to use his left hand, Melissa sobbed. He is confused, Brad. He doesn't know what he is doing, Perfect, Brad muttered. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be there. He placed the pen into my left hand. It felt alien awkward. I waited a beat, letting the suspense build, letting them sweat. Then I pressed the tip to the paper. I didn't sign my name. I dragged the pen across the line in a jagged, erratic scrawl. The B was backward. The rest was just a tremor in ink. It looked like the scratching of a man who had lost his mind, or a man under extreme duress. That was exactly what I wanted. I finished the squiggle and let the pen drop. Brad snatched the paper away instantly. I cracked my eyes open just a slit enough to see him holding the document up to the light, a look of triumph twisting his face. Good enough, he whispered more to himself than to Melissa. It is witnessed. It is done. He didn't care that it looked like a child's drawing. He didn't care that I was still gasping for air on the floor. He had his power of attorney. He thought he had just won the war. He didn't realize that I had just given him a grenade with the pin pulled out, and by the time he realized it was a forgery of his own, making it would be too late to run. The pen had fallen from my hand, and Brad and Melissa had retreated upstairs, satisfied that they had secured their fortune. I lay on the floor for a long time, listening to the silence of the house. My chest still ached, not from a heart attack, but from the phantom weight of betrayal. But as the adrenaline faded, a strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a man who has nothing left to lose. They had taken my house. They had stolen my savings. They had even tried to take my dignity. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed that because I was old, I was weak. They assumed that because I was quiet, I was defeated. I pushed myself up my joints, protesting with every movement. I didn't go to the cot. Instead, I walked over to the corner of the basement where my old military footlocker sat. It was battered and scratched, covered in dust, the only piece of my past that Brad deemed worthless enough to keep. He probably thought it was just full of moth-eaten uniforms. He was wrong. I knelt down and unlatched the rusty clasps. The smell of old canvas and brass polish wafted up a scent that instantly transported me back 50 years. I dug through the layers of memories, a faded green jacket, a stack of letters from Catherine, a medal I never wore. At the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small black leather notebook. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Not from age, but from the weight of what this little book represented. It was my contact log from my days as a master mechanic in the Corps, and later as a private contractor. It was filled with names of men I had served, with men I had fixed engines for men who owed me favors. Most of the numbers were disconnected now. Most of the men were gone. But there was one entry written in blue ink on the last page that I knew was still valid. Private A. Harrington, 1985. Underneath the name was a number, not a cell phone number, a direct line. A line that Lex had given me the day he became a billionaire, a line he swore would never change. For emergencies only, Bernie, he had said. For when the engine blows and you're stranded. Well, the engine had blown, and I was stranded in a basement with 2 predators upstairs. I looked at the number. It was late, past midnight. But I didn't care. I wasn't calling a CEO. I was calling a friend. I stood up, clutching the notebook to my chest like a shield. I walked to the small window and looked out at the moon. Brad thought he had signed my death warrant tonight. He thought he had tricked a senile old man into handing over his life. He didn't know that the signature he got was fake, and he certainly didn't know that the senile old man was about to make a phone call that would bring the wrath of God down upon his head. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply closed the notebook, put it in my pocket, and waited for the sun to rise. Tomorrow I would escape this prison. Tomorrow the counterattack would begin. And when it was over, Brad wouldn't just be broke. He would be destroyed. The window was barely 18 inches tall, a narrow rectangle of glass positioned high up on the cinder block wall. To a younger man, it would have been a tight squeeze. To a 72-year-old man with a fractured hip and a heart condition, it looked like an impossibility. But necessity is a brutal teacher. I stacked the milk crates I had been using as a table, wobbly and uncertain, against the wall. I climbed them slowly, biting my lip until I tasted copper to keep from screaming as my bad leg took my weight. I unlatched the window. It swung upward, revealing a slice of the night sky and the underside of the deck where Brad had sipped his champagne just hours before. I didn't think about the drop on the other side. I just thought about the notebook in my pocket. I pushed my head through, then my shoulders. The rough concrete scraped my skin raw, tearing through my flannel shirt. I wiggled, shimmied, and fought my way out of that basement like a man being born again, pulling myself from the womb of my own misery. I tumbled onto the wet grass of the backyard, landing hard on my shoulder. Pain exploded in my arm, but I scrambled into the shadows of the hedges before the motion sensor lights could flicker on. I was out. I was free. But freedom was 5 miles away at the nearest gas station. I walked. I walked along the shoulder of the highway, cars zooming past me at 70 miles an hour, their headlights illuminating a disheveled old man limping in the dark. To them, I was probably just a vagrant, a piece of roadside debris to be avoided. I kept my hand pressed over my pocket, guarding that number, like it was the nuclear launch code. Every step sent a shockwave of agony up my spine, but I fueled myself with the image of Brad's smug face. I wasn't walking away from my life. I was walking toward my retribution. The gas station was a beacon of neon in the darkness. There was a payphone on the corner, an ancient graffiti-covered relic that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 90s. I prayed it still worked. I dug into my pocket and pulled out a handful of quarters, my allowance, that I had hoarded for weeks. I fed the coins into the slot. The dial tone hummed a lonely mechanical sound. I dialed the number from the notebook. My fingers shook as I pressed the buttons. 1, 8, 0, 0. It rang once, twice, then a click. Harrington Residence, a woman's voice answered. It was crisp, professional, and completely devoid of emotion. Who is calling at this hour? I took a deep breath, leaning my forehead against the cold metal of the phone box. My name is Bernard Caldwell, I said, my voice raspy from the cold. I need to speak to Alexander. I am afraid Mr. Harrington is asleep, the woman replied instantly. And he does not accept unsolicited calls. Please contact his office during business hours. Wait, I said before she could hang up. The desperation clawed at my throat. Don't hang up, just tell him a code. There was a pause. A code. Tell him, I swallowed hard, looking at the flickering fluorescent light above me. Tell him wrench 1985. Tell him the mechanic is calling in the debt. The silence on the other end stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. I thought she had hung up. I thought I was alone. Then I heard a rustling sound, a muffled exchange, and suddenly the voice on the line changed. It wasn't the secretary anymore, Bernie. The voice was deep sleep rough but unmistakable. Is that you, Lex? I whispered, tears finally stinging my eyes. The engine is blown, kid. I need a lift. I waited under the flickering neon sign of the gas station mart, shivering in my torn flannel shirt. I expected a limousine. I expected a convoy of black SUVs with tinted windows and security guards speaking into earpieces. That is how billionaires travel, right? But when a vehicle finally pulled into the empty lot 20 minutes later, it wasn't a tank. It was a dusty 10-year-old Ford sedan, the kind of car you see in every supermarket parking lot in America. The driver didn't wait for a chauffeur to open the door. He threw it open himself and stepped out into the cold night air. It was Lex. He was wearing a tracksuit and a baseball cap pulled low, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a dad making a late-night milk run. But when he saw me, the years melted away. He didn't look at my dirty clothes. He didn't look at the blood drying on my arm or the scrape on my cheek. He looked at me with the same eyes he had when he was a 20-year-old kid broke down on the side of the road. Bernie, he said, his voice choking slightly. He didn't shake my hand. He pulled me into a bear hug. I stiffened at first, ashamed of my smell, ashamed of my weakness. I was a man who had lost his home, his pride, and his family. I felt small. But Lex held on tight, patting my back with a heavy hand. I got you, he whispered. I got you, old friend. He helped me into the passenger seat. The car was warm, smelling of old leather and coffee. He handed me a thermos. Drink, he said. It is black, just how you like it. As we drove away from the fluorescent glare of the gas station, heading toward the city skyline that glowed in the distance, I tried to apologize. Lex, I am sorry. I didn't know who else to call. Brad. He took everything. The house, the savings. He thinks I am senile. He is trying to put me away. Lex gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He won't put you anywhere, Bernie. Not while I am breathing. But you need to understand something. You kept saying he took your money. The 400,000 from the house, I nodded, staring out the window. It is all I had, Lex. Lex laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Bernie, do you remember that $10,000 you gave me in '85? You said it was for parts. You said, pay me back when you make it. I shrugged. I figured you used it for rent. I never expected it back. I didn't use it for rent, Lex said, glancing at me. I used it to incorporate. I issued you founder's stock. Class A preferred shares. You never checked up on it. You never answered the shareholder letters. I just kept reinvesting the dividends for you. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He tossed it into my lap. I turned on the map light. It was a balance sheet from Harrington Industries. At the top it said, Bernard Caldwell Trust. I looked at the bottom line. I squinted, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark. There were too many zeros. 35 million, Lex said quietly. I looked at him stunned. What $35 million, Bernie? That is what your 10 grand is worth today. You are not a charity case. You are one of the largest individual shareholders in my company. You could buy and sell Brad Pierce 10 times over before breakfast and not even notice the dent in your wallet. I stared at the paper. The numbers blurred. 35 million. I wasn't a poor old man being bullied by his son-in-law. I was a sleeping giant. Lex reached over and squeezed my shoulder. So the question isn't how we are going to survive this, Bernie. The question is, how much fun do you want to have taking him down? Because with this kind of ammunition, we don't just win, we obliterate. The heater in Lex's old Ford rattled softly, blowing warm air onto my frozen hands, but the warmth I felt came from a different source. It was the heat of the paper resting in my lap. $35 million. It was enough to buy a private island. It was enough to hire a mercenary army. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to fantasize about never seeing Brad or Melissa again. I could just tell Lex to drive. We could go to the airport, charter a jet, and I could spend my final years fishing in New Zealand, leaving my ungrateful children to rot in the mess they had created. Lex seemed to be thinking along the same lines. He put the car in gear, his jaw set in a hard line. We are not going back there, Bernie. I am taking you to the city. I have a suite at the Four Seasons that is bigger than Brad's entire house. In the morning, I will unleash my legal team. We will freeze his assets by noon. We will have him evicted for elder abuse by dinner. You never have to step foot in that damp basement again. He started to pull away from the curb, but I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. The engine idled. I shook my head slowly. No, Lex. Turn around. Take me back. Lex looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Excuse me. Did the cold freeze your brain? You want to go back to the cage. You want to go back to the man who is starving you. If we stop this now, I said, my voice steady. Brad walks away. He loses the money, sure. Maybe he gets a little public embarrassment. But he will spin it. He will tell everyone he was just trying to care for a difficult, senile old man. He will play the victim. He always does. And Melissa? She will never learn. She will just blame me for ruining her husband's career. I looked down at the balance sheet, then crumpled it slightly in my fist. I don't want to just survive, Lex. I want to win. And to win, I need him to commit. I need him to stand in front of a judge and lie under oath. I need him to present that forged signature. I need him to try to sell my land to you. Lex stared at me, the streetlights casting shadows across his face. He saw the fire in my eyes. It wasn't the look of a victim. It was the look of a soldier setting an ambush. You want to be a Trojan horse? Lex whispered, realizing the plan. You want to let him drag you into court so you can destroy him from the inside out. Exactly, I said. I go back. I play the part. I let him think he has won. I let him get so confident that he exposes his neck. And then when the judge asks if I have anything to say, you walk in. Lex was silent for a long moment. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, weighing the risks. It is dangerous, Bernie. You are frail. If he hurts you— He won't hurt me, I interrupted. He needs me alive for the hearing on Friday. He needs his prop. Lex finally sighed, a long exhale of resignation and respect. You always were a stubborn old mule. That is why I liked you. He put the car in reverse and swung it around, heading back toward the suburbs. But if you are going back into the lion's den, you are taking some insurance. I am not letting you go in there naked. By the time you wake up tomorrow, I will have eyes and ears in that house that Brad won't even know exist. You just hold the line, Bernie. Hold the line until I get there. Getting back into prison is harder than breaking out. Lex dropped me off a block away to avoid the headlights sweeping across the front lawn. I limped through the wet grass, the morning dew soaking through my shoes, freezing my toes. Climbing back through that narrow basement window was agony. My hip screamed, and I scraped my other arm, leaving a fresh smear of blood on the concrete sill. But I made it. I pulled the milk crates away, collapsed onto the cot, and pulled the thin, scratchy blanket up to my chin just as the first gray light of dawn started to filter through the glass. I didn't sleep. I lay there and rehearsed. If I wanted to trap a wolf, I had to look like a dying sheep. I let my eyes lose their focus. I let my mouth hang open slightly, slack-jawed. I stopped wiping the drool from the corner of my lip. When the heavy footsteps finally pounded down the stairs at 7 o'clock, I was ready. The door swung open, and Brad stood there holding a steaming mug of coffee. He didn't offer me any. He just stood in the doorway, wrinkling his nose at the smell of the damp room, checking to see if his problem had expired during the night. "Bernie," he barked. "You awake?" I waited a beat. Then another. I turned my head slowly, looking past him, staring at the blank wall. "Catherine." I mumbled, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" "Did you make the eggs?" Brad let out a short, cruel laugh. He took a sip of his coffee, stepping into the room with a new swagger. "Catherine is dead, Bernie. She has been dead for 10 years. God, you are losing it fast, aren't you?" I blinked rapidly, feigning confusion. "Dead? No. We have to plant the tree. The oak tree." Brad shook his head, pulling his phone out of his pocket. He dialed a number, not even bothering to step outside. He treated me like a piece of furniture, like a radio left on in the background. "Gavin, it is me," he said into the phone. "Yeah, I am looking at him right now. He is totally gone. He thinks his dead wife is making breakfast. It is pathetic, really. But it is perfect for us." "Yeah, the hearing is Friday. No, don't worry about the competency evaluation. I can get him to say anything. He doesn't even know what year it is." He walked closer to the cot looming over me. I shrank back, letting my hands shake visibly. "Don't worry," old man Brad sneered, reaching down to pat my cheek. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a tap of ownership. "We are going to take good care of you. We found a nice place with padded walls where you can talk to Catherine all day long." He turned and walked back up the stairs, whistling a cheerful tune. He left the door unlocked this time, probably thinking I was too confused to find the knob. He was so confident, so arrogant in his victory. He didn't see the man inside the shell. He didn't see that as soon as his back was turned, my eyes cleared and the shaking stopped. He thought I was fading away. He had no idea that I was memorizing every word, every insult, and every threat, adding them to the ledger that I was about to cash in. The Trojan horse was inside the gates, and the enemy was asleep at the wheel. The delivery arrived with the morning landscaping crew. A man in a neon safety vest who I had never seen before knelt down near my basement window to trim the hedges. He didn't look at me, but as he moved on a small waterproof pouch, remained hidden beneath a pile of dead leaves. I waited until the mower engine faded before I snatched it inside. Lex did not disappoint. Inside was a camera no bigger than a shirt button and a tablet with a pre-encrypted connection. It was spy-grade tech, the kind of gear that topples governments now deployed to topple a suburban narcissist. I waited for the house to empty out. Melissa had her Pilates class at 10, and Brad usually took a late lunch. At noon, the house was silent. I moved with a purpose that belied my aching joints. I crept into Brad's office, the heart of the beast. I didn't want to hide the camera somewhere obvious. I looked at the bookshelf behind his desk. It was filled with leather-bound books on ethics and leadership that looked like they had never been cracked open. The irony was too rich to pass up. I wedged the tiny lens between a copy of The Art of War and a biography of Lincoln. It had a perfect, direct line of sight to his desk and his computer screen. I retreated to my bunker and turned on the tablet. The image was crystal clear. It was like I was sitting in the chair opposite him. At 2 o'clock, Brad stormed in. He slammed the door, loosened his tie, and sat down. He didn't look like the confident golden boy anymore. He looked stressed. He pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase, my tax returns. I watched on the screen as he uncapped a pen. He wasn't just reviewing them. He was altering them. He was scratching out the income lines from the dividends I supposedly didn't have, trying to make me look destitute on paper to qualify for state aid. That was federal tax fraud. Strike one. Then his phone rang. He put it on speaker, a habit born of arrogance. "Yeah, I have the zoning map right here," Brad said, his voice tinny through the tablet speakers. "Look, Commissioner, I don't care about the environmental impact study. That oak tree is coming down next week." I gripped the edge of my cot. He was talking to a county official. "I know there is a waiting period," Brad continued, his voice dropping lower. "But we don't have time to wait. I need that demolition permit issued before the probate hearing on Friday. If you can make that file float to the top of the stack, there is a $5,000 consultation fee in it for you. Cash. In a gym bag. Just like last time." I hit the record button on the screen. My hand was steady. Bribery. Conspiracy. Fraud. In the span of 5 minutes, Brad had just handed me the keys to his prison cell. He hung up the phone, looking satisfied, thinking he had greased the wheels of his success. He had no idea that the silent eye on his bookshelf had just captured his confession in high definition. I saved the file and backed it up to the cloud server Lex had set up. I lay back on my pillow, watching the little progress bar hit 100%. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The night before the hearing felt less like the anticipation of a legal proceeding and more like the calm before a storm that levels a city. The house was quiet. Melissa had gone to bed early, sedated by a sleeping pill and the comfort of her denial. I was awake, sitting on the edge of my cot, when the lock clicked one last time. Brad didn't just walk down the stairs. He descended like a director coming to check on his lead actor before opening night. He wasn't carrying a weapon, but what he held in his hands was intended to be just as destructive to my dignity. He threw a plastic grocery bag onto the cot next to me. It crinkled loudly in the silence. Inside was a bundle of clothes that smelled of mildew and neglect. I pulled them out. A pair of gray trousers that were stained at the knees and frayed at the hems. A shirt that was missing 2 buttons. And a cardigan that looked like it had been chewed by moths in the 1970s. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the sweater. It was hideous. It was the kind of thing you donate to a shelter, and even they might think twice about accepting it. "It is your wardrobe for tomorrow," Brad said, leaning against the support beam with his arms crossed. He looked me up and down, visualizing the scene. "Listen. Bernie perception is reality in a courtroom. If you walk in there wearing a suit, looking clean and put together, the judge might hesitate. He might think, hey, maybe this guy is okay. Maybe he doesn't need a guardian. And we can't have that risk, can we? He stepped closer, kicking the toe of my shoe. We need to sell the narrative. We need the judge to look at you and see a helpless, confused, pathetic old man who can't even dress himself properly. We need him to feel sorry for you. Pity is a powerful motivator, Bernie. It is what is going to win us this case. So you wear the rags. You shuffle your feet. You look at the floor. Do you understand? I ran my thumb over the rough wool of the cardigan. It was insulting. It was a caricature of poverty designed by a man who had never known a day of want in his life. He wanted to strip away the last of my pride to parade me in front of the county as a broken relic. He expected me to fight him. He expected me to throw the clothes in his face and demand a suit. But I didn't. I needed him to be confident. I needed him to think I was completely under his thumb. I looked up at him and forced a small, trembling smile. You are right, Brad, I said, my voice soft. I don't want to confuse the judge. I want to do what is best. I clutched the moth-eaten sweater to my chest as if it were a comfort blanket. Thank you, son, I added, injecting just the right amount of senile gratitude into my tone. This fits me perfectly. It really does. Brad smirked, satisfied. Good. Be ready at 8. And don't shower. It adds to the effect. He turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the dark. I looked at the rags in my lap. He saw a costume of defeat. I saw a uniform of camouflage. He wanted a poor old man. I would give him the performance of a lifetime. I would wear his insults like armor. And when the moment came to shed them, the contrast would only make his destruction more absolute. The house was finally silent, settled into the heavy breathing quiet of 3 a.m. I sat on the edge of the cot, the springs groaning softly under my weight, holding the only thing I had managed to save from the purge. It was the photograph of Catherine, the one I had wrapped in my undershirt and hidden inside my pillowcase. The frame was bent at the corner, and there was a hairline crack running through the glass right across the sky above her head, but her face was untouched. She was smiling that half-smile of hers, the one that used to tell me she knew what I was thinking before I even opened my mouth. I ran my thumb over the cold glass, whispering into the damp air of the basement. I am sorry, Kat. I have to start with that. I have to ask you to forgive me, not for being old, but for being weak. I let them walk into our sanctuary. I stood by and watched them pack your life into cardboard boxes like it was just clutter. I let them sell the porch where we drank our coffee. I let them take the garden where you spent your summers. I did it because I was tired, Catherine. I was so tired of the silence. I traded my spine for the promise of a warm meal and a family that didn't exist. I thought if I gave them everything, they would love me. I was a fool. I was a lonely old fool who forgot that you can't buy loyalty from wolves. I looked at the pile of dirty clothes Brad had thrown at me earlier. The costume of the defeated. He wants me to be pathetic, Kat. He wants me to be the confused old man who needs a keeper. He thinks he has already won. He thinks he is going to take the money we saved for 30 years and spend it on cars and hollow applause. He even thinks he is going to cut down your oak tree. He called it an obstruction. He wants to bulldoze the place where we scattered your mother's ashes just to make a quick buck. I felt a tear trace a cold path down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. I let it fall onto the glass. But I promise you this, my love. That tree is not coming down. Not while there is breath in my lungs. I have been patient. I have been quiet. But tomorrow the silence ends. I am going to walk into that courtroom wearing these rags, and I am going to let him think he is the king of the world. And then I am going to pull the rug out from under him so hard he won't know which way is up. I am scared, Kat. My hands are shaking. I am not the young man who carried you over the threshold anymore. My heart is weak, and my hip is on fire. But for you, I will find the strength. I will be the soldier you married one last time. I am going to destroy his greed with the truth. I am going to take back our name. So watch over me tomorrow, sweetheart. Stand beside me when I can't stand on my own. Because when I walk out of those doors, I won't be a prisoner anymore. I will be coming home. Rest easy, Cat. The fight is just beginning, and I am going to give them hell. Judge Thompson adjusted his glasses, the wire frames glinting under the courtroom lights. He looked at the documents Lex had slid across the bench. Then he looked at Brad, and finally he looked at me. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system and the terrified, shallow breathing of my son-in-law. Brad's lawyer, Gavin Ross, was the first to find his voice, though it sounded significantly less confident than it had 10 minutes ago. "Your Honor, this is preposterous," Ross stammered, shuffling his papers nervously. "Mr. Harrington has no standing here. We are here to discuss the welfare of an indigent senior citizen who cannot afford to feed himself. This is a guardianship hearing, not a corporate merger." Lex didn't even turn his head. He stood up slowly, smoothing the front of his bespoke suit. He looked at Ross with the kind of pity one might show a child trying to explain why they drew on the walls with crayon. "It is a guardianship hearing based on a lie," Lex said, his voice deep and resonating off the wood paneling. "You claim my client, Mr. Caldwell, is destitute. You claim he is a financial burden on your client, Mr. Pierce. You claim he has assets totaling less than $500. Lex paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. He walked over to the jury box, even though there was no jury using the space to command the room. "That is a fascinating narrative," Lex continued. "But it is mathematically impossible. Because according to the forensic accounting I completed this morning, Mr. Caldwell is not poor. In fact, if we look at the flow of capital over the last 3 months, Mr. Caldwell is not a dependent. He is the bank." Brad made a noise like a strangled cat. "Your Honor," he shouted, standing up, "this is irrelevant. My father-in-law is confused. He doesn't know what he has. Sit down." Mr. Pierce, the judge, barked, slamming his gavel. "I want to hear this. Mr. Harrington, explain yourself." Lex turned back to the judge, a small cold smile playing on his lips. "It is simple, Your Honor. Mr. Pierce lives in a $4 million home. He drives a Porsche. He throws galas that cost $15,000 a night. But Mr. Pierce has not generated a profit in his business in 3 years. He is leveraged to the hilt. His credit cards are maxed out. His mortgage is 3 months behind." Lex pointed a finger at me, but it wasn't an accusation. It was a vindication. The only reason the lights are still on in that mansion, the only reason Mr. Pierce isn't standing in a bread line today is because he liquidated Mr. Caldwell's home and stole the proceeds. He didn't invest it. He spent it to cover his own bad debts. So let us be very clear about who needs a guardian here. My client is not the one who is incompetent. My client is the solvent party. And Mr. Pierce, he isn't a concerned son-in-law. He is a debtor. And Mr. Caldwell is his largest creditor, holding the note on a lifestyle Mr. Pierce can no longer afford. The color drained from Brad's face so completely he looked like a ghost. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The narrative had flipped. I wasn't the pathetic old man anymore. I was the man holding the leash, and Lex had just pulled it tight. "That is a lie," Brad shrieked, his voice cracking like a teenager's. He jumped up, knocking his chair back against the railing. "The money is in a diversified blind trust. It is locked up in long-term bonds. You can't just access it. It takes time to mature." Lex didn't even blink. He didn't look at Brad. He simply raised his hand, and one of his assistants placed a large foam core board on an easel facing the judge. It was a blown-up graphic of a bank statement redacted of sensitive numbers, but clear enough for everyone in the back row to read. "Let us look at this maturity, shall we?" Lex said, his voice dripping with icy sarcasm. He pulled a laser pointer from his pocket. The red dot danced across the chart. "Here is the deposit on October 15th. $450,000. The entire net proceeds from the sale of Mr. Caldwell's cabin. The dot moved down a line. And here is October 16th, a wire transfer of $82,000. Was this for stocks, bonds, num? It went to Portia Financial Services to pay off the arrears on your lease, Mr. Pierce. Brad's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Lex continued relentless. November 2nd. $50,000 transferred to an offshore crypto exchange that is currently being investigated by the SEC for fraud. November 10th. $25,000 to a luxury watch dealer in Manhattan. And my personal favorite. The red dot circled a cluster of transactions in December. $110,000 paid to the Bellagio Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. The courtroom gasped. It was a genuine collective intake of breath. Was that a business trip, Mr. Pierce? Lex asked, finally turning to face him. Did you invest my client's retirement on the roulette wheel? Because according to these records, the house won. And the current balance of the so-called Pierce Family Growth Fund is exactly $12.42. I watched Melissa. She was sitting directly behind Brad, her hands covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the chart. She was trembling. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking so bad I thought she would fall. Vegas, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but in the silence it sounded like a scream. You said you were at a fintech conference in San Francisco. You said the market was down. You told me we couldn't afford Dad's medication because of inflation. Melissa, sit down. Brad hissed, spinning around to grab her arm. Don't listen to him. He is manipulating the data. It is a smear campaign. Don't touch me, she screamed, recoiling from him, as if he were made of fire. She looked at the chart, then at me. She saw the old coat I was wearing. She saw the reality of the last 3 months crashing down on her. You spent his house money on gambling. You made him live in the basement while you lost $100,000 in a weekend. She looked at Brad with a look I had never seen before. It wasn't love. It wasn't fear. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. I didn't know, Dad. She sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. I swear to God I didn't know. He told me it was safe. He told me he was taking care of us. Brad looked around the room, sweat pouring down his face. He was cornered. His lies were stripped away, leaving him naked and shivering in the harsh light of the truth. But Lex wasn't done. He stepped closer to the railing. Oh, Mrs. Pierce, he said softly. The gambling is just the tip of the iceberg. Wait until you hear what he tried to do with the land. But the land... Brad stammered. His eyes darting around the courtroom like a trapped animal trying to find a cracked window. We are forgetting the land. He still owns the 3 acres by the lake. It is prime real estate. I have the power of attorney right here. I have the authority to manage all his assets, and that land is worth at least $200,000. I can sell it to cover the debts. I can fix this. He was grasping at straws, desperate to prove that there was still something left to squeeze out of the stone. He looked at the judge, pleading his case with sweaty desperation. Your Honor, the liquid assets may be temporarily unavailable, but the real estate is solid. As his guardian, I have a fiduciary duty to liquidate non-essential assets to pay for his care facility. That lot is just dirt and an old tree. It is a waste of capital. It needs to be sold. Lex let out a low, dry chuckle. It echoed in the silent courtroom, cutting through Brad's panic like a knife. He walked back to his table and picked up a thick, bound document. He didn't hand it to the judge this time. He held it up for Brad to see. You really didn't do your homework, did you? Brad. Lex asked, his voice deceptively gentle. You were so busy counting the money you thought you could steal, you didn't bother to read the deed history. I read the deed, Brad snapped, his voice rising in pitch. It is in his name. I saw the tax bill. It was in his name, Lex corrected, stepping closer. Until 10 years ago, You see, shortly after Catherine passed away, Bernie didn't want that land to ever be developed. He didn't want it to become condos or a strip mall. He wanted it to remain exactly as she loved it. So he transferred the title. Lex opened the folder with a sharp snap. The land does not belong to Bernard Caldwell. It belongs to the Catherine Caldwell Memorial Nature Preserve. It is an irrevocable charitable trust registered as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Bernie isn't the owner. He is simply the honorary groundskeeper. He holds a lifetime lease to reside on the property, but he has zero equity. He couldn't sell it if he wanted to. And neither can you. Brad froze. His mouth hung open. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the gut. The color that had returned to his face drained away instantly. So let us recap, Lex continued, turning to the judge, his voice hardening. Mr. Pierce here didn't just try to sell an old man's home. He drafted a sales contract for property that belongs to a charity. He took a deposit from a developer for land he has no legal right to touch. In legal terms, Your Honor, that is not guardianship. That is attempted grand larceny and fraud against a charitable institution. You were trying to sell a memorial site to pay off your bookie, Brad. How do you think the state attorney is going to look at that? The judge's face turned a deep, angry red. He lowered his glasses and looked at Brad with pure contempt. Mr. Pierce, the judge, rumbled, his voice shaking the bench. Is this true? Did you attempt to liquidate a non-profit trust without checking the title? Brad couldn't speak. He slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him. He looked at me, and for the first time he didn't see a victim. He saw the man who had outsmarted him at every turn. He realized then that the land wasn't his safety net. It was the final nail in his coffin. I just looked back at him sitting in my ragged sweater and offered him a small, sad smile. The trap was sprung, and he was caught tight. Your Honor, Lex said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom like a razor. We have established the financial theft. We have established the attempted fraud against a charity. But the petitioner's entire argument rests on the claim that he is a benevolent guardian acting in the best interest of a man he loves. He claims my client is a burden. He claims he treats Mr. Caldwell with dignity. I would like to submit one final piece of evidence to address the character of the petitioner. Lex signaled to the bailiff. The large monitors mounted on the walls flickered to life. It was the footage from the camera I had hidden in the bookshelf. The timestamp in the corner showed it was recorded just 2 days prior. The image was high definition, capturing every bead of sweat on Brad's forehead and every sneer on his lip. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the on-screen Brad threw the pile of tax documents onto his desk. Then came the audio, crisp and damning. I don't care if it is illegal, the digital Brad shouted into his phone. Just fudge the numbers. Make him look destitute. If the state thinks he has assets, they won't grant the emergency custody order. I need him declared incompetent by Friday so I can get access to the pension fund. A gasp rippled through the gallery, but the video wasn't done. It cut to the moment I had walked into the office in my rags. The cruelty was visceral. Look at you, Brad's voice echoed in the silent courtroom. You are a parasite, Bernie. A useless ticking time bomb. I am going to dump you in that state facility so fast your head will spin. And don't worry about visiting hours. No one is coming. You are going to die alone in a room that smells like bleach, and I am going to be drinking scotch on your front porch. Melissa let out a wail. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. Even Brad's own lawyer looked down at his desk, unable to watch the screen. Then came the final nail. The phone call to the commissioner. The bribe. $5,000 in a gym bag. Brad jumped to his feet, his face a mask of panic and rage. That is illegal, he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Lex. You can't use that. That was a private conversation in my own home. This is entrapment. The sound of the gavel was like a thunderclap. It struck the wooden block once, twice, 3 times, silencing the room instantly. "Enough!" Judge Thompson roared. The veins in his neck were bulging. He leaned over the bench, glaring at Brad with a look that could have stripped paint from the walls. "Mr. Pierce, you will sit down, and you will be silent. In 30 years on the bench, I have seen greed. I have seen negligence. But I have rarely seen such calculated, malicious cruelty toward a vulnerable family member. You came into my courtroom asking for guardianship. You came here asking for control over this man's life. You have not only disqualified yourself, sir, you have just provided the district attorney with a signed confession to tax fraud, bribery, and elder abuse." The judge turned his gaze to the bailiff. "Secure the exits. No one leaves this room until the sheriff arrives." I sat there in my moth-eaten sweater, watching Brad collapse back into his chair. He looked small. He looked weak. The video froze on the screen, capturing his face in a moment of arrogant laughter, a ghost of the man he used to think he was. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was the feeling of a heavy burden finally being lifted off my shoulders. The truth was out, and it was deafening. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to rattle the very foundations of the courtroom. He did not look at the papers in front of him. He did not consult with the clerk. He folded his hands on the bench and leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Brad with the intensity of a predator who has finally cornered its prey. The air in the room was so thin, it felt difficult to breathe. Mr. Pierce, the judge, began his voice low and dangerously calm. "In my jurisdiction, the family court is designed to protect the vulnerable. It is a shield, not a sword. You have attempted to use this court as a weapon to strip a competent man of his rights, his assets, and his dignity. You have presented forged documents. You have lied under oath. And as we have just witnessed, you have engaged in a conspiracy to defraud the state and bribe public officials." Brad opened his mouth to speak, to offer some spin or excuse, but the judge raised a single finger, silencing him instantly. "I have heard enough from you, sir. The petition for guardianship is hereby denied with prejudice. That means you are permanently barred from ever seeking control over Mr. Caldwell's affairs again. The temporary power of attorney you coerced your father-in-law into signing is immediately vacated and declared null and void." The judge shifted his gaze to the bailiff standing by the door. "But we are not finished. Based on the video evidence and the financial records presented by Mr. Harrington, I am finding you in direct contempt of this court. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for immediate prosecution. The charges will include perjury, elder abuse, tax fraud, and grand larceny. Bailiff, please take Mr. Pierce into custody." The room erupted into chaos. Brad stood up, knocking his chair over. "You can't do this," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I am a respectable businessman. This is a misunderstanding. I have a flight to catch. 2 deputies moved in on him fast. They didn't treat him like a respectable businessman. They treated him like the criminal he was. They spun him around, forcing his hands behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and final, cutting through his protests like a knife. Bernie Brad yelled, twisting his head to look at me, desperation wild in his eyes. Tell them, I took care of you. Tell them about the room. Tell them we are family." I sat there smoothing the fabric of my moth-eaten trousers. I didn't look away. I watched him struggle. I watched the man who had sneered at me for months now begging for my mercy. I slowly stood up, leaning on the cane I didn't really need anymore. I looked him dead in the eye. "You are not family, Brad," I said, my voice clear and strong, shedding the tremor I had faked for so long. "You are just a bad investment, and I am closing the account." The deputies hauled him away, his expensive Italian loafers dragging on the carpet. As the heavy doors swung shut behind him, cutting off his shouts, a collective exhale swept through the room. Melissa sat frozen in the front row, staring at the empty space where her husband had been. I looked at Lex, who gave me a subtle nod. The war was over. The king was dethroned. And for the first time in a long time, the courtroom didn't feel like a place of judgment. It felt like a place of justice. The gavel had fallen, the deputies had dragged Brad away, and the heavy oak doors had swung shut, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. I stood by the defense table, gathering the few papers I had brought with me. I felt light. The crushing weight of the last few months had vanished, replaced by a strange, hollow clarity. I turned to leave, ready to walk out into the fresh air with Lex, but a hand grabbed my arm. It was Melissa. Her mascara was running in dark streaks down her cheeks, ruining the perfect polished look she had spent hours curating. She looked terrified. For the first time in her life, the safety net was gone. The mansion was likely foreclosed. Her husband was in handcuffs, and the credit cards were undoubtedly frozen. She was staring at the abyss, and she wanted me to pull her back. "Dad," she sobbed, clutching the sleeve of my ragged sweater. "Oh my God, Dad. I am so sorry. I didn't know. You have to believe me. Brad, he manipulated everything. He lied to me too. I am a victim here just like you." She tried to hug me, to bury her face in my shoulder like she did when she was 6 years old, and scraped her knee. But I didn't hug her back. I stood rigid, my arms at my sides. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my arm and took a step back, creating a foot of distance between us. It wasn't a large gap, but it felt like a canyon. "Melissa, stop," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "Dad, please," she pleaded, wiping her nose. "We can fix this." "You have the money now, right?" Mr. Harrington said. "You have millions. We can get a good lawyer for me. We can buy a new place. I will take care of you, I promise. I will make sure you have the best room. We can be a family again." I looked at her. I looked at the daughter who had sat in the front seat of the Porsche while I sat in the back. I looked at the woman who had bought a $12,000 handbag while I was in pain because she said she had no cash for my medicine. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a lifeline. She was asking for a new host to attach herself to. "No, Melissa," I said. She froze. What I said, no. There is no we. There is no new house. And I am certainly not going to let you take care of me. You watched your husband put me in a basement. You walked past that door every single day. You heard him scream at me. You saw the bruises. And you did nothing. You chose your comfort over my dignity. You chose an ostrich leather bag over your father's health. "Dad." I was scared, she cried. "No, you were greedy," I corrected her. "And I am partly to blame. I made life too easy for you. I shielded you from every storm. I let you think that money was something that just appeared, not something you bled for. Well, I am done failing you. I am going to give you the one thing I should have given you 20 years ago." I reached into my pocket. She looked hopeful for a split second, expecting a checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a single crumpled $20 bill, the emergency money I had hidden in my shoe for weeks. I pressed it into her hand. "Here," I said. "This is for a taxi." "A taxi?" She stared at the bill, confused. "Where am I going?" "I don't know," I said, buttoning my coat. "That is for you to figure out. You are a grown woman, Melissa. You have 2 hands and a brain. You want a lifestyle, go earn it. You want a house, go build it. But do not come to me. The bank of Dad is closed. Permanently." I turned my back on her. I walked toward the exit where Lex was waiting, holding the door open with a proud smile. "Dad." Melissa screamed after me, her voice shrill with panic. "What am I supposed to do?" I stopped for 1 second, looking back over my shoulder at her standing alone in the empty courtroom. "Sell the bag, Melissa," I said. "It should cover your rent for a few months. Welcome to the real world." And with that, I walked out the door, leaving the tears, the guilt, and the basement far behind me. The sun was shining outside, and for the first time in years, the air tasted sweet. The double doors of the county courthouse swung open, and for a moment, the brightness of the afternoon sun blinded me. I blinked. taking in a deep breath of air that didn't smell like floor wax and desperation. But the peace didn't last long before my eyes could adjust. The noise hit me like a physical wave. It was a wall of clicking shutters and shouting voices. They were everywhere. At the bottom of the concrete steps, a sea of cameras and microphones waited. Brad's dramatic arrest had apparently leaked faster than water through a sieve, and the sharks were circling. They wanted a soundbite. They wanted the angry father-in-law. They wanted the victim to cry for the 6 o'clock news. "Mr. Caldwell, did you know about the embezzlement?" "Bernie over here? What do you have to say to your daughter? Is it true you are suing for millions?" The questions overlapped into a chaotic roar. Microphones were shoved in my face like weapons. I felt a sudden surge of anxiety. I wasn't a celebrity. I was just a mechanic who wanted his dignity back. I tightened my grip on the handle of my cane. I didn't want to give them a single word. My silence was my victory, and I intended to keep it. Then I felt a presence beside me, solid and immovable. Lex stepped in front of me, using his broad shoulders to create a path through the madness. He didn't speak to the press either. He just glared at them with the cold authority of a man who owned half the city, and miraculously, the sea of reporters parted. They knew better than to block Alexander Harrington. I kept my head down, focusing on the concrete steps. As we reached the curb, I stumbled slightly, my bad leg finally giving way under the exhaustion of the adrenaline crash. I reached out instinctively, and Lex caught my hand. He didn't just steady me, he held my hand tight, a grip that went back 40 years to a muddy workshop where we dreamed of better days. It wasn't a handshake between business partners, it was an anchor between brothers. We walked like that for a moment. Two old men, holding on to each other, moving through the flashbulbs, united by a history that none of these people could understand. A long, sleek black car pulled up to the curb, gliding to a stop like a land shark. It wasn't the dusty Ford sedan Lex had driven the night before. This was the Phantom, the flagship usually reserved for diplomats and royalty. A driver in a uniform hurried to open the back door. I slid into the leather seat, and it was softer than any bed I had slept in for months. Lex climbed in beside me, and the heavy door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, cutting off the shouting reporters. Instantly, the silence inside the cabin was absolute and beautiful. I looked out the tinted window, watching the distorted faces of the press fade away as we pulled into traffic. Lex didn't say anything. He just tapped the glass partition and told the driver to drive. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes, letting the gentle hum of the engine vibrate through my bones. I was leaving the courthouse. I was leaving the betrayal. And I was leaving the man who tried to break me in the rearview mirror. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't look like a dead end. It looked like a beginning. Everyone expected me to change. They thought $35 million turns a man into someone who drinks champagne for breakfast and wears suits made of Italian silk. Lex even tried to show me a few condos in the city places, with elevators and concierges who open the door for you. But I told him to save his gas. I didn't want a view of the skyline. I wanted a view of the past. I wanted the only place on earth that ever felt like me. I called the young couple who had bought my house. They were nice folks just starting out. When I offered them double the market value to sell it back to me, they thought it was a prank. But the check cleared, and 2 weeks later I was walking back through my own front door. The smell hit me first. It was the smell of old pine lemon polish and 30 years of coffee brewing in the kitchen. I put Catherine's photo back on the mantel, right over the spot where the paint was a little brighter. It fit perfectly. The house breathed a sigh of relief, and so did I. Now I am sitting on the porch. The sun is going down, painting the sky in streaks of purple and gold, the kind of sunset Catherine used to say looked like spilled watercolor paint. I have a cold bottle of beer in my hand, the condensation dripping onto my knuckles. It tastes better than any of that vintage wine Brad used to hoard in his cellar. I rock back and forth in my chair, listening to the crickets start their evening song. It is the sound of peace. Parked in the driveway, right where my old rust bucket used to be, is my new baby, a brand new heavy-duty pickup truck. It is midnight blue with chrome accents that shine like mirrors. It has leather seats, a heated steering wheel, and an engine that purrs like a tiger. It is fully paid for. No loans, no leases, no begging my daughter for a ride to the pharmacy. If I want to drive to the coast tomorrow to see the ocean, I just go. That is what freedom looks like. It looks like a set of keys in your pocket that no one can ever take away. I haven't heard from Brad. He's currently trading cigarettes in a federal holding cell waiting for his trial. The lawyers say he is looking at 10 years. I haven't heard from Melissa either, not since I returned her letters unopened. It might sound harsh to some people. They might say a father should always forgive. But I learned the hard way that forgiveness without change is just permission to be hurt again. I spent years trying to buy their love, trying to be useful enough to be kept around. I realized you can't build a home on a foundation of obligation. I took a long sip of beer and looked out at the yard. The great oak tree was still there. Its branches swayed gently in the wind, casting long shadows across the grass. They wanted to cut it down. They wanted to bulldoze it for a few extra dollars. But it is still standing. Tall, strong, and deeply rooted, just like me. I looked at the empty rocking chair beside me. I didn't feel lonely. I felt complete. I had my dignity. I had my home. And I had the truth that took me a lifetime to learn. Family is where love is not just where the blood is. The story of Bernie reminds us that the true worth of a person is never defined by their bank account or their age. It teaches us that dignity is a right, not a privilege, and that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. We often neglect the elderly, assuming they have nothing left to offer, yet they carry wisdom and connections. We cannot imagine true family is built on respect and genuine care, not on inheritance and greed. Ever underestimate the quiet ones, for they often hold the keys to the kingdom. And remember that kindness is the only investment that never fails. If you enjoyed Bernie's journey of justice, follow us for more stories of triumph, and let us know in the comments what you would do if you were in his shoes.